More about variables. Uh, Now, the thing about variables is that some of this is going to be things you already know. All right, and I have to assume that not everybody is going to remember what you remember from your high school or whatever. So we're going to start with the very, very basics. And that means we're going to start with a definition of what a variable is. And quite simply, a variable is anything that changes, anything that can take on different values or different qualities. And it would be the opposite of, let's say, a constant. A constant is something that doesn't change, right? So your age is a variable, your height is a variable, your IQ is a variable, your hair color can be variable if you decide to dye it, right? It can be all different colors. Um, your hair color will probably change whether you dye it or not, because oftentimes we see hair color change as we get older. So all of these things are variable. So are, the color of your clothes. They're not all the same color. They're not constant. Right. One way we can classify variables is whether, according to whether they are qualitative or quantitative. A qualitative variable is one that differs by type or kind. So examples, movie genre. You have horror movies, my personal favorite. You have sci-fi, comedy, drama, documentary. These are all different types of movies. So movie genre is not constant, it's variable, but the different categories are not numerical. They refer to some sort of difference according to type or quality. All right, another example, university major. So whether you're a psych major, biology, art, music, whatever. Day of the week. Now, sometimes we say day of the week, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you might think that that is not qualitative, it's quantitative, because now we're talking about numbers. But more typically, we refer to the day of the week as Sunday, Monday, all the way through Saturday. So day of the week, depending on how you word it, it could be quantitative if you express it as numbers, but generally speaking, we don't think of day of the week that way. We think of day of the week as being Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, etc. A quantitative variable is a variable that differs by amount. All right. So and it's typically expressed as a number. So if you think about age, we differ by the amount of years or number of years we've been alive. So we express that as a number, 1, 2, 3, etc. Your weight would be another quantitative variable, because weight is typically expressed as a number, pounds, kilos, grams, ounces, whatever. All right. Now, going back to day of the week, all right, and again, I said you could put numbers, right? You could put 1 through 7, but it's not really a variable that is varying by amount. It really, I mean, it would be a bit of a stretch to say that, if you are on day 3, you have 3 days more than, or 2 days more than day 1 type of thing. All right, so although we can put it into numbers, typically day of the week is considered qualitative. But these, because they're typically expressed with numbers and because they're varying by amount, we would refer to these as quantitative. Now, another way that we can express a variable, another way we can categorize variables is according to whether they are continuous or discrete. A continuous variable is a quantitative variable, and you can get any number between two adjacent numbers, at least in theory. All right, so it's a quantitative variable, so that means it differs by amount. And between any two adjacent values, any number is possible. So I'm going to give you some examples here. If we're looking at the length of something, and let's say we determine that it's, somewhere between 18 and 19 centimeters long. Well, could we get a number between these two adjacent values? And the answer is yes. Something could be 18.5 centimeters long. What about this? What if something is between, or could something be between 18.5 and 18.6 centimeters long? Okay, so you have to choose two adjacent numbers. Ask yourself, could you get something in between? And the answer is yes. If you had an instrument that could measure that precisely, something could be 18.55 centimeters long. So hopefully you're getting the picture here now, right? So these two adjacent values, 18.55 and 0.56, could you get something in between? Yes, in theory, you could. If you had an instrument that could measure this precisely, something can be 18.555 centimeters long, right? And so on. So you see how, at least in theory, any number between two adjacent numbers is possible, and that makes it continuous. Now, in contrast, discrete variable can be either quantitative or qualitative. Okay, so it can be expressed numerically or categorically by kind or by type. So quantitative or qualitative. And here, there is no such thing as an infinite number of values between categories. All right, so it's a variable where an infinite number of in-between values or categories is not possible. So let me give you some examples. We look at the number of psychology majors. Since we're saying number of psychology majors, that would be a quantitative variable, right? Number of majors. And if, let's say, this semester we have 485 psychology majors, could we have 485.5 psychology majors or 485.261 psychology majors? No, the number of majors is going to go up by increments of 1 in this case. So it's discrete increments of 1. Or we could say discrete decreases by 1. So you could have 485 majors, 486, 487, or you could drop by 1, 484, 483, but you can't get in between. Now, if we look at just the type of major, psychology, biology, chemistry, English, history, etc., this is an example of a qualitative variable, right? Because these are categories that are differing by kind or type. And it's still the case that you can't get anything in between. What is in between a psychology major and a chemistry major? Right? Who knows? It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as in between. You might feel like you're in between majors sometimes, but quite literally, once you're given a designation, that's your designation, right? In your head, you're in between, but on paper, you're either this major or you're that major. We don't have anything that says, well, you're 3/4 a psychology major and 1/4 a chemistry major. All right, we just don't have that. And then another example, dessert preference. Now, with a preference, that means you're identifying a specific preference. So some people might say chocolate cake. Another person may say lemon meringue pie or a fruit cup or something like that. But there's nothing in between that. That variable would place you into one category or another, but not in between categories. So again, this is an example of a qualitative variable because the categories differ by kind or type, right? Type of dessert that you prefer. And there's no such thing as something in between. right, another $1 million question here. Can a continuous variable be converted into a discrete variable? Can a continuous variable, that's the one where you can have any number can fall between two adjacent numbers, can that be converted to a discrete variable? And the answer is yes, it can. Because let's take age. Now, normally we see age as a quantitative variable, right? And we think of it as, it is the case that you can get anything between two adjacent ages. So you can be 18.1 years old or 18.11 years old, or etc. So we can divide it up into more and more precise values, right? So it's a continuous variable, numerical. What if I took age and I said, you know what, I'm going to take my participants' age in a study I'm doing, and I'm going to group them as young, middle, old. Then I've taken people and and their age, and I've put them into discrete categories. Young is anything, let's say, between 18 and 21. Middle is between 22 and, 49, and 50 plus is old, which it's not old, by the way, but I'm just, for the sake of this, lecture, let's just say we put those people in the old group. So you see how we've taken this continuous variable age and we've placed people into one of three in this case, one of three discrete categories. So yeah, we can take a continuous variable and make it discrete. Now, what about the other way around? Can a discrete variable be converted to a continuous variable? Well, it depends on the nature of the discrete variable, right? If it was dessert preference, then no, because, dessert preference, chocolate cake, lemon meringue pie, fruit cup, how are you going to take that and quantify it and then be able to get any number in between? Right? So if it's already in a qualitative discrete category, then it's unlikely, because I never want to say never say never, right? But it's unlikely that you're going to be able to take that variable and convert it so it's numerical and continuous. But let me give you another example. What if we have age and we grouped people according to young, middle, and old? Well, you could, in theory, as long as you asked for people's ages to begin with, their exact age, then you could just go back to your data set and look at their exact age. And now you're looking at a quantitative continuous variable. But if, let's say, on a survey, you didn't ask them for their exact age, you just said, in which age category do you fall? So you'd have to tell them young is 0 to 21 and middle's 22 to 49, etc. You'd have to tell them that, but then they would say, well, I'm in this category. Now, then you couldn't take, if that's what you did, you couldn't take that information, young, middle, old, and convert it back to a continuous variable, numerical variable. Because again, if you didn't collect their exact age to begin with, how are you going to convert 0 to 21 into a continuous variable? It's a category now, right? So there's an implication here for statistics. We're going to be limited in our statistics with, these discrete variables, where especially, if they're categorical in a particular category, kind of is going to limit our ability to analyze that data. We have more options available if we've got a numerical variable that's continuous. Now, that's not to say that we should always have continuous variables, numerical continuous variables. There are lots of times, more often than not, in fact, where we're going to have a combination, actually. In fact, that's probably 99.99% of the time when we do research, we're going to have continuous variables, numerical variables, and we're going to have both discrete and discrete categorical and quantitative variables. All right, so we're going to have a mix of everything. But in terms of a variable like age, I always recommend that if you've got a continuous variable, don't ask questions that will put people into categories. You can create those categories later if you like, but when you're collecting the data, collect the actual numbers, all right? Because you can do more with them later on.